So, have you guys ever heard of the vegan honey debate? It's a little side tangent, but bear with me here. It's the fact that vegans can't decide whether honey is actually a vegan thing or whether it's not. And there are some vegans that say, well, it's exploitation. And then there are other vegans that say, well, no, actually, it's not exploitation that makes you vegan. Rather, it's the fact of cruelty, and really, taking honey from bees isn't cruelty. And so, this is like this kind of debate that I think that FlyQuest are doing, which is perfect, right? Because they're the nature org or whatever the fuck. And they can't decide even between that small factor, but also the fact that is this actually a carnivore organization, or is it a herbivore organization, right? And like that's like the comparison that I make to junglers a lot, of whether they're an herbivore jungler or a carnivore jungler. You could determine which one I like more. But that's what I view FlyQuest as an organization, and like they're just stuck between this identity crisis kind of. And it seems like they construct rosters in order to stay like right in the middle of the pack, and that's it. And it's like specifically constructed to do this, and you could see that they kind of go into the bargain bin for some of the players and whatnot, on a roster that otherwise would typically be pretty good if not for like two players or something. So anyways, I feel like there is no greater objective for this org, but we'll get into that as we get into this new roster for 2022. Let's go with Kumo in the top lane, Jose Diodo at jungle again, Tukui, I think I'm pronouncing that correct, in mid lane, coming over from Europe, and then Johnson, ADC, and Afromu as support. So on paper, you're looking at this roster and you're just like, well, like, come on, dog. Like, it's really not that bad. Well, let's break it down. Let's go from top to bottom and discuss this. So Kumo in the top lane, he, I think, remains to be unimpressive. He has been an unimpressive top laner basically since his debut. And then he even was sent back to Academy in order to play on Evil Geniuses, right? He was sent back to Academy. So I think this guy has had enough time in order to determine whether he's good or not. He didn't come out of the gate swinging in any of his games, really, and he's been like this lukewarm top laner, and I can't see where his strengths lie. Is he a good tank player? Is he a good carry player? Like is he good weak side? Like, what function does this guy serve? I just can't see what he's actually good at. Usually, what you can see with rookie players or newer players, etc., is that they at least have one spark in them, right? Like one thing to where you're just like, okay, I could build this up into something great. With Kumo, I don't really see that. Like, I'm not trying to like pick on the guy or anything, but I really just don't see the bright spot in his play, like, at all, from any particular angle whatsoever. So that's why I question why FlyQuest would even pick this guy up. It just seems like a budget move. But then we're going to get into, well, really, I think this is kind of a budget year for FlyQuest. So typically I would say, like, well, the rest of the roster does, speak otherwise as to why maybe this isn't a budget year. But I think this is still kind of a budget year. So let's move on to the jungle, because, dude, I just have no clue with Kuma. I don't know why that move makes sense. Anyways, I'm done. Jose Diodo, I didn't see why they even brought this guy over to North America to begin with. Yes, okay, he was on Rainbow Seven, right, which was a popular team over in Latin America, I think I'm calling that right. or maybe it was CB Law. And yeah, okay, guy looked great over in that region, but as we know, if you bring someone in from a weaker region, they're facing against weaker opponents. So obviously they aren't going to look as good. And how much of as good, like, that is hard to determine. I admit that, but like, they got to be really fucking good in order for you to even bring them over. And a chance on a region like Turkey is actually not a bad gamble, because I think there are a lot of strong players and a lot of strong teams over there. So I have no problem with bringing over Turkish players. The same thing with, well, no, not even Australian players. I don't agree with, because formally, because it counted as an import slot, right? So like, I didn't agree with any of that. So realistically, like, I just don't see why you would bring this guy into the fold as such. He didn't make sense last year. He doesn't make sense to keep this year. And I don't think he's going to turn the spark on. And on top of that, they even brought in that NXI guy in order to play in his stead, because they were juggling different rosters and things and trying to find a good combination of what works or what doesn't work. So I think it's pretty clear that this guy is not going to work out in North America. But maybe there is the low percentage play that he does work out. But I highly doubt it, which is why I'm confused with this move as well. Then you go to the mid lane with Tukui. So Tukui he's coming from the LFL, which is the French league over in the LEC, right? Or the ERLs, the European regional leagues. Trying to break all this down if you guys don't watch any of that shit. I don't really watch any of that shit either, I'm not going to lie. But I know that France is actually a strong region. I think people are saying it's the strongest region in the ERLs, if I'm not mistaken. But so he went 5th and then 7th for 2021. In a strong region, right? And then he got first in 2020 summer split, and summer playoffs, etc. So it's not like this guy doesn't have accolades to his name. I mean, he hasn't won, a European Masters, but that's something big to ask of someone, and they would have already been picked up by LEC teams anyways. So realistically, you're just wondering, like, well, okay, I kind of see why they would pick him up, but at the same time, also too, I don't think he has much of a choice but to join, right? If a North American team asks you to join and you aren't getting any LEC offers too, right? And now consider this as well, and the fact that no one's going to bid high for you anyways, so it's not like you're pitting LEC teams against North American teams in that sense, right? There's no bidding war for these guys anyways, and rightly so, because they're coming from an amateur league. You're betting on them, etc. So, and then on top of that, it's pretty obvious that no one put in a similar bid for this guy, given that he's moving away from his home country as well too. So, like, I question why you would actually give this guy a chance anyways. He's not like the cream of the crop player, so at least from what I hear, I think. So it's very strange as to why you would patch this in, especially in a team like FlyQuest. It just seems like something that's very out of place, and it was done just as a kind of dice roll, and which is it's just a really weird move that doesn't really have any undertones of what I would consider logical sense, or of a grander scheme of what you want to do with the team or organization. Johnson is coming in as ADC, and I'm not sold on Johnson at all. I'll be frank with you guys. And the fact that Johnson is probably the worst out of all the new ADCs. Like, and that's just being honest. He has already been eclipsed by Danny, Tactical, FBI, Lost, and he's on par with Neo to some extent. So maybe that does justify him actually being in the league and the fact that Neo is also still in the league. But it gives pause for exactly the pool of what is within North America as far as ADCs are concerned. But also, too, he's kind of like Kumo in the sense of, where does this guy's strengths lie? Like, is it the laning phase in terms of being aggressive? Is it being able to team fight very well? Is it being able to survive very well or have good positioning for outputting damage? Like, there really is no, or even a vast champion pool. There's really no reason I can see of the plus side of who Johnson is as an ADC. And if you're FlyQuest, who he came from Dignitas, you're expecting, okay, well, we're going to play with this guy and hopefully there's the low percentage, D20 roll to where, we land on at least 15 in order to somewhat strike a small amount of gold. So I once again, I don't get this move for the roster either, other than maybe he was on sale, right, as a discount or something. Afromu, I think he actually still deserves a spot. He had some choice performances last year over in Dignitas. But also, too, I think this kind of shows just how weak North America is in terms of the need for supports. I think this is probably the position to where North America needs the most help. And the fact that there really aren't that great of North American supports anymore, in fact. So I'm not saying that Afromu doesn't deserve a spot within the league. I think he certainly does warrant it, especially considering that he does have the occasional pop-off game. And he has such a wealth of knowledge to where, you can have him teach other players and other rookies, etc. And, like, also, he just went with playing Neo to now he's playing with Johnson, like his other fucking doppelganger. So, like, I wonder too, when you have these two players pairing together, if you think there's gonna be some spark of divinity in the fact that, well, if he didn't really do a whole lot with Neo to improve Neo's play, what makes you think that he's going to do any better with Johnson? Because Johnson is at the same fucking spot that Neo is at. So I don't really see it. But like, whatever, I guess. So FlyQuest's roster seems to just have the biggest identity crisis out of all the other teams. And that's very strange to say, given that there are a lot of other bad organizations or bad teams. I think that's fair to say. And FlyQuest is, they're doing okay as far as like branding is concerned with their little, green initiatives and stuff like that. Like that's fine. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about their roster building is what they have an identity crisis in. And the idea that first they construct a lot of rosters to where there are big holes within the rosters, which essentially don't allow them to, either like challenge for the title or even challenge for the top spots. Like we're talking top 3, unless, previously before with the FlyQuest roster of what was it? It was like Solo, Santorin, Pobelter, Wild Turtle, and Ignar, right? Like, yeah, that was a good roster, but then everything kind of fell apart after that. I don't get what FlyQuest's game plan is now, because they aren't a development org, like say Golden Guardians have that excuse. Even Evil Geniuses kind of have that excuse. You have CLG that is trying to go that route and pivot. Immortals is actually one of the teams that takes risks in terms of just interesting ideas about how they build their roster, and they build it with good cornerstones. So, like, realistically, FlyQuest are kind of lost to the wind. And so, yeah, I'm very confused about this team. I don't think that they'll place high at all. I don't think that they'll even make playoffs. And yeah, they're going to be stuck in that pack of 7 to 10, which is actually incredibly disappointing to see another org that both just wants to, I guess, fight for mediocrity, but also too just doesn't have a game plan in order to build for their future. I think that's what's probably the most frustrating thing about this 2022 roster.